Hey guys, so I'm Michaela, and my group, me and Emily, are covering Chapter 8, which is the production chapter. So just an overview of what this chapter talks about is, production refers to the transformation of raw foods to a finished product, and a majority of times in restaurant settings, you see how the foods go from raw to a cooked version. Sometimes you see the raw versions as well, but a majority of times they are cooked, and there's a difference in appeal, taste, aroma. We take a look at how it is management's responsibility to set standards within a food service and to make sure everyone is aware of them. It is a management's role to make sure that what the employees are inputting is going to cause a good output of production. And that includes standardized recipes, good quality ingredients, proper supervision of production, and meal planning and scheduling. So food production, so in high volume operations, they have a complex transformation of ingredients to final product, which basically means that there's a lot of steps that go into it. If you're starting from scratch, then there's going to be a whole lot of ingredients that are smaller and become one big final thing. There are quite a couple of things that are vital to production that include planning, scheduling, and appeal. It depends on the type of food service system that you're in. So the four ones. So depending on each one will depend on what product is made and how you go about doing that, and then the quantity. You want to know the steps required in the transformation. So the 6 steps are storage, thaw time, pre-prep, preparation, assembly, and holding before serving. Some objectives of food production. The approach to production, the use of inputs and desired outputs. Like I said before, you want to make sure that what is being input is going to cause the desired output that you want as management and as a team of employees. Basic objectives: to enhance the appeal of the raw food through color, texture, and flavor, which is done a majority of time through cooking. You want to destroy harmful microorganisms for consumption, which is a good safety precaution. You don't want to cause anybody to get sick, and you want to make sure that everything is good to eat. For the consumers and the not only the customers, but the people inside the walls of the restaurant or the organization. You want to improve the digestibility and nutrient retention. So if you're going to be cooking a food, you're going to want to make sure that the nutrients that are in that food are retained as well as possible. And the food manager must be knowledgeable about the physical and chemical properties of food and its preparation. So it's really important that food managers understand the time-temperature relationship of food, and that they can explain that thoroughly to their employees so that they can do that correctly. Some reasons why we would use computers in production, especially in food production, would be for recipe formulation. So to create recipes, to alter them, which we'll talk about later, but they're used to adjust base recipes. So as long as you have a base recipe on file, there's a lot of things you can do with that. And management of recipe files. So in the book it talks about how there are a couple of restaurants who have 8,000 or more recipes, and that's really hard to keep in paper, and it's easier if you have a computer system that is designed for this, that you could easily break them down into categories by types of foods, by what they are consisting of, by gluten-free, vegetarian, options like that. Make it easier to pick up and to look in a file and find them. Anything that makes finding a recipe easier is what they go for. Okay, so recipe formulation consists of standardized recipes. So a recipe is standardized when it has been tested and adjusted to its consumers and the environment it's in. So depending on where the organization is located, it's going to depend on what the recipe is adjusted for, etc. So the format of a recipe contains quite a number of things, but a format is normally picked by the restaurant or the organization, and they stick to it, because you wouldn't want a chef to be going looking for a recipe and they pull one out and it's completely different. So, for instance, recipe title is a big one. You want that in our recipe. It's normally in big font, which is up in the corner or in the center. Yield and portion size, which is different than recipe yield. Yield and portion size kind of relates to when the food is done, what the employees are using to portion it out for the consumers, just to make sure that, I guess you could relate it to the nutrient content, like you would want like a serving size to be accurate. Cooking time and temperature, that's normally at the top or it's preferable to be at the top, because that way while you're preparing other things you can go ahead and get things preheated and have a time window that you're looking at. If you have a time window of 30 minutes and a recipe says an hour and a half, then you know as a chef that you can't risk doing that. It wouldn't be safe. It's not going to be it's not going to look correctly. It's just not good enough. Ingredients and quantities are on a recipe per usual. So in this format, or for organization format, there's normally 3 columns. The first one on the left is ingredients, middle is quantities, and then the third one is procedures. So as the ingredients are listed, they're listed by what order they're used. So if I relate this to like brownies, everybody loves brownies. So if the first step is to spray the pan, then maybe the first ingredient is going to be to spray the pan with oil or butter. So that'll be the first ingredient, and then directly across from the ingredient will be how much, so the quantity, and it might be like a tablespoon or something if you have like a stick of butter, and then right next to that will be the procedure, which would be spray or butter pan. So that's just an example. Next we have recipe yield, which tells the chef or whoever is looking into the recipe how many people it can serve. And this is important because a lot of times organizations can increase that, decrease that by certain procedures or certain methods, and especially important if you want a certain thing to go a lot longer than the known yield. Quality standards, which is basically an analysis of your sensory things, so like aroma, flavor, texture, like the way it tastes, the way that people enjoyed it. If people didn't like it, what were some fallbacks, kind of things to improve. So those are just some like little comments, I guess, that would be at the bottom. Okay, so here's an example that I found. Kind of see how right here, which this one's a little bit backwards, but still the purpose of they're all together. So you have the ingredients, and then you have the quantity, and then you have the procedures over on the right side. So it makes it easier to look at because you see how they're all put in order of how the recipe goes. Okay, so recipe formulation. Oops, sorry. There are 2 methods there are 2 common methods. There's technically 3, but there's 2 common methods that organizations use. So the first one is the factor method, which we'll talk about, and the percentage method, which will be on the next slide. So this little diagram, the percentage method is very complex. It's a lot of steps. It's not as simple as the factor method, which is just some dividing. This right here, basically the percentage method is you take all the ingredients and you are going to be dividing the the quantity of it by the whole amount, and then you're going to get a percent, and they're all going to be different. But that's on the next slide. So that's just a little visual. It kind of helps me. But the third method will be adapting small quantity recipes, which is typically home size recipes that you would want to expand to feed a bigger amount of people. Okay, so the first one is the factor method, which, like I said, you're going to basically take the desired yield. So if you wanted to serve 75 people and you take the known yield, which might be 12, you're going to divide those and you're going to get the 6.25, which is then a conversion factor that you will use for the entire recipe. So then you're going to take all measurements and you're going to convert them to weights, which would be pounds or ounces, depending on how big the number of the measurement is. Then you're going to multiply the new amount of each ingredient, which would be the new converted the new converted amount, and multiply it by the 6.25 that you now have, or whatever conversion factor. And then you're going to round off the fraction of decimals, which will, a lot of times with it being such a bigger desired yield, you're going to want to keep it in pounds and ounces. It just makes it easier to weigh out. Okay, so let me move this. So the percentage method consists of 8 steps. The first one is, like the other one, to convert all ingredients to pounds and tenths of pounds, so you want to keep it very consistent. The second step would be to total the weight of all ingredients. So after converting it, you're going to make a whole, like a total, so it'll be so-and-so pounds. The third step is to calculate percent of each ingredient in relation to the total weight. So if you had a total of 1,000 pounds, or that's a lot, 500 pounds of ingredients, and then you had 250 pounds of a certain ingredient, then the percent of that would be 50. So just an example, but you would want all of the ingredients to equal 100%. You're going to check the ratio of ingredients, because if you're only supposed to have a small amount of something and you do your math and there's 60% of it, then you're going to want to recheck all of your math and make sure that it looks correctly. The fifth step would be to find the total weight of a product needed by multiplying the portion weight by the number of servings to be prepared. The next step would be add estimated handling loss to the weight, because transferring things, you never know what might spill, kind of thing. And then you're going to multiply each percent by the total weight to give the exact amount of each ingredient needed. So very complex compared to the factor method. I feel like the factor method is a lot easier to use. It's less steps. The percentage method is probably more accurate, but yeah. And that is it. So I will hand this over to Emmy.
Hey guys, my name is Emmy Hancock, and I am here to talk to you about forecasting demand. So forecasting demand is a prediction of foods needed for a day or other specified time period that serves as a means of communication with purchasing and food production staff. This is different from tallying, which is a simple count of menu items actually requested by customers. Forecasting is a first step in production planning and triggers other food service functions such as purchasing, storing, thawing, pre-preparation, and distribution, because none of this can be done without forecasting. It also facilitates efficient scheduling and equipment use. The reasons for forecasting are that it improves accuracy, which minimizes the chance of overproduction or underproduction. And employees typically have a tendency to overproduce in fears of running out. But this can be very costly because leftover food runs a risk of not meeting quality standards, because it can be reheated and redistributed, but it's not going to be the same as when it's fresh. And underproduction can lead to customer dissatisfaction, loss of potential business, and employee frustration. Historical data. This is used to establish trends in sales and determine forecasting. It's pretty much just all of the past data of what customers ordered, of what the restaurant ordered, and different forecasting that has been accurately recorded and is pretty much used to establish trends in sales. Restaurants and cafeterias, they're going to look at different things than vending services are. They're going to look at the customers served per meal, menu items sold per period, and beverage sales. Vending services are going to look at the total cash that has been put into the machine, the drinks or food that is left in the machine, and the ones that were sold more rapidly. So forecasting models. There's 3 different ones. They're pretty much going to depend on the type of food service facility, and the main factors that influence the choice are cost, which is the training and education of staff, accuracy, which past data and food selection patterns must be relevant and accurate, so that also goes with the relevance, and lead time, which must allow enough time for purchasing, delivery, and production, as well as accounting for perishability. Food selection patterns, which change with seasonality, level of detail, and responsiveness to change. The moving average model pretty much takes all of the data and as it inputs a new number, it drops off the oldest one. So it's constantly changing and continues for all the data available. And it's constantly modernizing itself to meet your current demands. The second one is the exponential smoothing model. This is a time series model that is much like the other one, but accounts for seasonality of data and adjusts for forecasting error. The third one is a computer system, and it's called the regression and autoregressive moving average. It's a statistical method where past data is analyzed to determine the best mathematical approach for forecasting. Then the trends in predicting production demand. There's so many internal and external factors that influence production demand, such as the weather, the staff, the customers, the season, pretty much all of that. Large-scale on-site food service facilities have reduced the need to predict demand in advance by implementing a made-to-order and grab-and-go concepts. They predict demand based simply on past demand and establishing par levels that are adjusted as needed on day of service. So a simple approach to the different trends and the quantities to produce are asking yourself, how many were served last time? Is there any stock or inventory left? And what has changed since the last time that you had to produce like a large scale, or the last time that you looked at this data? Forecasts are usually adjusted during production because of the influences that were not accounted for when the forecasts were calculated. Like weather can be incredibly influential, and the actual amount of food prepared is based on the number of persons to be served, portion size, and the amount of waste and shrinkage lost in preparation. Some of these can just not be accounted for forecasting because in the food service industry, a lot of it is on a day-to-day basis. Like schools usually lower their forecast in the cold and flu seasons to account for all the absences of kids. So production scheduling. This is the last step of the planning process, and it is to ensure efficient use of time, equipment, and space by identifying what menu items to produce, what quantities to produce, when the quantities and individual items need to be produced, and who is responsible for preparing each item. The thoughtful production scheduling and planning minimizes production problems and maximizes product quality. Because food prepared too far in advance runs the risk of increased deterioration, low yield, microbial contamination, and then products that are produced too close to production or prepared too close to production run the risk of delayed service and creating chaos in the production. This requires a knowledge of the steps through which a menu item must go from the time ingredients are assembled to the point of service. This is called flow of food, which is incredibly important in the food service industry. A production schedule must be shown to all staff, and it is a detailed document used to communicate with and to the production staff the work that needs to be done for a specific period of time, and this is usually discussed in production meetings. Ingredient assembly. The most popular type of ingredient assembly is a central assembly of ingredients, which is pretty much where they take all the ingredients in preparation and they kind of put them together in a bag or container and label them with the ingredient or with the recipe. And so this has many advantages, such as increased portion control, improved security, consistent quality control, and an efficient use of equipment. Some disadvantages are a lack of flexibility because it's already bagged, it's already together, and it has a certain amount. So if you run out and didn't prepare enough, then you're kind of out of luck. And also a restriction of the creativity with the cooks. This is usually alleviated when cooks are allowed to adjust seasonings and different garnishes at the point of production. So they can kind of, add their own little touch to it. And accuracy is extremely important for the acceptability of the final product. And this is pretty much talking about consistency. So, like this coffee that I got from the library coffee shop is the same order that I get every single time I go there. And it's always the same because they do a great job at being consistent. But if I were to go multiple times a week and it were to be different every single time, I would not be a satisfied customer because that's not what I'm asking for. And also, if a group of people go out to a meal and everybody has a side of fries and they're all different sizes, then the customers are not going to be satisfied with that because they're all paying the same price, and you don't want to pay the same price if you're getting less than the other person. So that's incredibly important, especially for the final product. And portion control. This also goes with consistency, like I just said with a different side of fries. Portion control controls cost. because you know exactly how much each portion is going to cost if it is the same size each time, and ensures the nutrient composition of the menu items, which this is incredibly important for all food service facilities, but also healthcare facilities such as like hospitals and nursing homes, because their patient health is dependent on the nutrient composition of the menu items. Consistency establishes and maintains customer satisfaction, and the food is portioned by weight, measure, or count, just kind of depending. And then product evaluation is an essential part of testing a new menu item, but it's also an ongoing product to always work on altering the menu, improving it, enhancing it, and so on. So this chart that is on this slide is an example of a product evaluation. It's from the book, and it's a perfect example because it has the item, you rank the flavor, texture, and appearance, put your comments, decide whether you should buy it, and if you think it should be added to the menu. This sensory analysis testing is done by a team or panel to judge quality characteristics in the interest of the customers. So yeah, and our discussion question is, why is historical data useful in forecasting? In what ways is it not always useful?